Podcast. So it's Kat and Rich again, and
Hello.
It's episode 32 this week. So,
It is.
Yeah, 32, eh? So what have we been up to this week?
So, a bit of an unusual week. We have been to Silverstone, to
Yeah.
the Porsche Experience Centre, but it was for Cupra this week rather than Porsche, which was a little bit different.
Yeah, they've hired it out a few times, haven't they?
Yeah, they have. You've done a few bits for Cupra, haven't
I don't know how long Cupra have been an individual brand, actually. I was trying to work that out, because I think they've been hiring out the facility for probably 3 years or so.
They probably have,
so it must have been going that long, but they've always used SEAT platforms, haven't they? And we're going to talk later about Cupra and where they're aiming to be, that kind of thing.
And their first pure non-SEAT based model.
Yeah, and also their electric side as well. So we were very fortunate to do lots of testing in different Cupras, and also what they're about to launch as well. So which I don't believe has been launched yet, the full electric model. So we were lucky that we got to see it and drive it as well. So we'll explain about that a bit later. But yeah, so at Porsche, but not really working with Porsche product, which is always a bit strange. But I guess they're under the VW umbrella, so I suppose that's why they use the facility, because it's kind of like a proving ground, isn't it, in many respects?
Yeah, it is,
You've got different areas and low grip areas, so it's great to show VIP guests and all that kind of thing. So but also I talk about proving grounds. We've been at Millbrook, haven't we?
We have, which was really quite interesting for lots of ways, again, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Yeah.
But we took a new client there and did a mix sort of road and Millbrook day, didn't we?
Yeah, so we started off at Millbrook doing dynamics, handling track kind of stuff, and then linking it back to the road with a half-day road drive afterwards. But yeah, like Rich says, it's always an interesting place to go. You have to have your cameras stick it up and all that kind of thing. You're not allowed to film on site because there's a lot of all sorts of models, isn't there? That haven't launched yet, so they kind of stick it up. You get all sorts of stuff. You get the Army, SAS, all sorts of training as well. So yeah, it's very strict and confidential. So unfortunately, we weren't able to film any of it, but we've got some really cool things to talk about a bit later on, haven't we?
We have, yeah.
And also then Sarah as well. So Sarah did her final round at Snetterton, which was great, because she started her first ever race at Snetterton, so we got a really good benchmark to see how much she's come on. And how many seconds was it?
From where she was in June.
Was it 11 or something?
It was 11 seconds, I think.
11 seconds. So that's a big gain in quite a short, condensed...
It's all down to the coaching.
Yeah, exactly. Well, hopefully it kind of is. But so she's really progressed a hell of a lot in a short space of time. You think that's all in less than a year? We're really dead chuffed with that. She did really well. It was very difficult conditions, but she was third fastest in race 1, second fastest in race 2.
Which was very wet as well, wasn't it?
We've just got to develop her car control a bit more. So that's what we're going to work on over the winter, like we do with a lot of drivers, is do a winter program effectively, and make sure they can really get a head start before the next season. Whereas a lot of drivers potentially don't do much. You might do a bit of fitness and things, but they really stop with the track stuff. But now we've got simulators and also, like we said, proving grounds as well as normal track circuit stuff. There's a lot you can do and utilise whilst you're, in your off season as such. So it gets you ahead of the game, really. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. So if we move on to road cars then.
Yes.
And we'll start obviously with Cupra.
Yes.
As we've just been, exploring their cars.
Absolutely. So from what we learnt on the day is that Cupra's plan is to sit between Volkswagen and Audi. So higher level than Volkswagen, lower level than Audi. I'm not sure there was room there, personally. But
well, I misunderstood it, because Cupra always used to be, so with SEAT, if you had the Cupra model, that was the most sporty, exciting model you could get. A bit like the M badge and...
AMG.
Yeah, exactly, so I misunderstood it. I thought Cupra were going to be this really, really sporty brand, but apparently no. That's not where they're going with it, even though they're bound to have sporty products, but that's not really what they're aiming for. They're aiming to sit above VW, so let's say above sort of the Golf R, that kind of thing, but below Audi. So they feel there's a gap in the market and they want to fill that gap. Now, time will tell if there really is a gap, but we were a bit surprised, only because VW has so much heritage. That is a real ask to sit above them but below Audi.
And I would say if you're in that kind of market, all you're doing is you're shifting sales from one brand to another. You're not getting new brand people, I would say. But
they obviously feel different. And I'm sure they've done a lot of market research on this. But of course, as the general public, you kind of think, is there really an opportunity here? But we will see. So we got to try the new Formentor, didn't we? Which is an SUV kind of crossover, isn't it?
Yes.
We're seeing lots of those on the road. Actually, we're driving up from Millbrook and I was counting randomly because I was bored how many small SUVs there are on the road now, and it seems to be the biggest market now. Totally not my market, I have to say.
Me either.
But in general, it seems to be the most wanted type of car in the UK now, isn't it?
Yes.
So what did you think to the Formentor?
Well, the Formentor's the first non-Seat based
yes,
Cupra, because that's going to be their biggest
else,
problem, I think, is everybody's going to always Seat.
Yeah.
But this is not a Seat; it's a pure Cupra
the
product.
First one, isn't it? Because we've had Cupra models before, but it's always been a Seat underneath, basically.
So you get a Cupra Alteca, which is a Seat Alteca.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's got a few more bells and whistles on it, that kind of thing. But really, it's a Seat.
Yes.
So this is different, isn't it?
Yes, and I thought they've played it very, very safe. Unlike with the Born, which I'll talk about in a minute, and I think they played it very, very safe. I thought it's quite a bland car, I thought.
Yeah, so it kind of
looked like a big Qashqai.
Yeah, I was going to say it reminds me of a Qashqai, really, and probably a more sexy version, in fairness to it.
Yeah, and the interior was pretty. I liked some of the design details in the interior.
I thought the seats were great.
Yeah.
You know, there's some nice finishing touches with the car. I wasn't keen. We're all going this way now with all manufacturers, but it was like a massive iPad in the middle, which I wasn't really into, I have to say.
No.
It's like 10 inches or something, and it's quite a big thing to have on the dash. And to be honest, it just makes you think iPad each time, and you've got your different apps. That's how it looks, doesn't it? So yeah, that didn't blow me away. But I thought the front of the car looks really, really good, and they've styled it so you can really see the bonnet.
Yes,
so it makes you
I like
feel
that, sitting in
a lot lower.
Yeah.
Even though it's an SUV, so of course you're sat higher than you think. So that's very clever, because it does make you feel really in it, not perched on top. Whereas a lot of SUVs, you do feel sort of sat on top of it, don't you?
Yeah, you do.
So I thought that was a really cool design feature. But as you get towards the back of the car, personally, it starts to look too much like too many other things.
Everything else, yeah.
So I think the front, they've done a really good job. A lot of the interior, they've done a good job. To be fair, it handles pretty well. I think for, something that is quite heavy and top heavy.
It was very neutral though, wasn't it?
Yeah, you could do pretty much anything with it.
Yeah, it's pretty
As I know, I
viceless.
was trying to get somebody to skid it basically on the ice hill, and it didn't want to do anything, even with ESC off, and that it just wasn't happening. Which is kind of credit really to the car, isn't it? What it's capable
Chassis
of.
engineering, yeah.
So in that sense, there's lots of perks to it. I suppose if you look at it, if you're not necessarily that into cars, then you've got a great all-round vehicle, haven't you, in many respects?
And a bit different, I suppose, in some ways.
Yeah. So, but I guess we're probably not the right market, are we, really? Because we're so, very kind of sporty, don't want SUVs. But
the thing is with them is that everything's a compromise to me.
Yeah.
Because it's now, you've raised the centre of gravity, so it's now on stilts. So it's never going to do anything particularly well.
Yeah.
It's always going to be a compromise, and generally you're fine with them that the ride's horrific because they have to make them very stiff, otherwise they don't handle.
Yeah, and then they don't have the off-road capability.
Yeah, and they're not really an off-roader.
But that said, like I just said, on summer tyres, trying to get the thing to move on a very slippery surface and it wouldn't have it. I thought that's actually really impressive.
Yeah.
So there's kind of, I can see what they're trying to do, and there is a big market there, isn't there, in general, for SUVs and these smaller SUVs, but probably not aimed at us. But they have different categories like any manufacturer, don't they? So they've got a VZ one, which is kind of all the bells and whistles.
It's basically Golf R on stilts.
Yeah, but it's over 40 grand as well. So that's where, for me, it starts to be a head scratcher, because once you're getting into that price bracket, you're competing with a lot of things. And
surely you're into Audis and things at that point. But
yeah, exactly.
It's all down to the monthlies, I guess.
Yeah, well, that's what they'll probably achieve. But there was something that did catch my eye, which is the Cupra Born, which I don't believe they've launched yet.
No.
But we were very lucky to see it and drive it, weren't we?
Yeah, it's a good-looking car.
Yeah, so it's a full electric car. So it's based on the ID3 model,
It's kind of a golf-sized electric Volkswagen, isn't it?
But it's, to be, in my opinion, far more sexy than that.
Definitely.
It looks really... It's the first electric car I have to say that's really caught my eye. It looks brilliant. It has these awesome wheels on it, and it just looks like it means business. Like it genuinely looks really sexy and sporty.
Where the ID3 doesn't. The ID3 looks a bit. It looks like an electric car. It looks a bit plasticky and a bit, you're not quite sure what it wants to be.
The front isn't that good looking, is it really?
Well, this is a good looking car.
Oh, it is. So it's got more range, hasn't it, as well?
It's got, well, it said when I got in it and drove it, it said 330-mile range. I guess it depends on how you drive it.
Yeah, like fuel.
Because they're not saying that, they're saying 260, but that's a reasonable range.
Exactly, yeah, absolutely. Okay, it's quite plain inside, isn't it?
A little bit,
but then I do think a lot of cars are now, to be honest, because we're going so digital with everything.
Yeah.
But that's kind of making it a bit more plain in general, isn't it?
It is,
in some respects. But yeah, it's really caught my eye. So it's a really sporty edge. I think that if anybody's looking at electric car in the future, this could be a car that would catch your eye because it looks the part. It's got good range on it. Like you said, it depends how you drive, but that's the case for anything with fuel or anything. It all depends on how you drive. But the start point is what, 32 grand?
Yes.
So that's not that bad, really.
No.
For something that's a good range, good finish,
Because
full
the
electric car.
other one I like is the Honda E. I think that's a cool looking car, but the range on that's like 130 miles or something.
Yeah. So this is where I think
this is a lot better for range.
Because I'm not into electric cars yet. Obviously, I know at some point I'll probably have to be, unless Porsche hurry up with Formula One with this fully synthetic fuel, which F1 actually did announce the other day. So I saw that on Motorsport app. So so we'll see. But but yeah, this is the first time it's properly caught my eye. So we'll see when it launches. I think it's not going to be available till next year, is it?
Yeah, that's what they're saying.
For the UK market. But yeah, certainly something to Google and have a little look at. So the other thing then, which is up our street.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's the GMA T50.
Yeah.
So all the footage you see on the internet so far is they've only been running the engine to about 5,000 revs.
Yeah.
But now they've been given green light from Cosworth to run it up to maximum revs, which is like 12.2 or something.
So this is the Gordon Murray T50, isn't it?
Yes.
So Gordon Murray originally designed the McLaren F1. So anybody who remembers that.
He's a Formula 1 designer, so he designed a lot of the championship winning cars in the 80s and 90s.
Yeah, so there was one with a big fan on the back, wasn't there?
Brabham fan car. Yeah.
That's it. So that has features in this new car, doesn't it?
It does, yeah.
And we were at Millbrook, and it just so happened they were there testing this T50, weren't they?
They were, yeah.
With was it Dario?
Well, Dario. So again, I've seen footage of Dario in their mule. So they've got an Ultima, which they call George.
Yeah.
So it's just like an Ultima, but it's got the running gear of a T50 in it.
Yeah.
And there's quite a lot of videos on YouTube of Dario driving that. But this was the actual T50 we saw, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Well, so I guess it was still Dario.
I think it was, because I saw at one point somebody go around with a painted helmet on and stuff on the handling circuit when I was out. So I think it probably was. Yeah. So it was the first time we've got to see it in the flesh. So we watched the launch of it. So this car's really old school in the fact that Gordon Murray's very much about keeping the car small, keeping it light.
It's tiny, isn't it?
Not working against physics, I suppose, working with it, because cars in general are getting much bigger, much heavier. So we're having to use a lot of trick technology to make it behave how we want it to behave, despite its weight gain. So he's keeping this as light as possible and keeping it simple.
Yes.
And it is very old school in many respects, isn't it? In the fact that it's all about being pure mechanical engineering.
It's the same size as a Boxster, isn't it? It's a tiny thing.
Yeah, but it's unbelievably fast. And it's probably the first time I've heard a road car that genuinely sounds like an old Formula One car.
The noise just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
I mean, we're very lucky we hear the Valkyrie quite a lot, don't we?
Yeah.
Because that's to do a lot of
Martin
that, and that sounds
version.
beautiful, the Valkyrie, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But this sounded so much more purposeful.
Oh,
didn't
it did. I think it was louder.
Yeah.
I think it was louder,
deeper, more of a bass to it,
more high revving. So yeah, really lovely to see it. I mean, what will it go for? Those
I think they're £2.5 million.
Yeah.
And there's 106 of them, but they're all sold.
Yeah.
So you can't have one anyway.
No, but it's very, very special car. So Dario said overall what an amazing car it is, and
he rates the best engine he's ever driven, he says.
But he was saying about heel and toe, wasn't he? He was struggling with the heel and toe with it, because it's such a free revving engine that basically it was giving him too many revs even when he was just touching the gas. So that's something that apparently they're working on, isn't it? Is
Yeah.
to try and obviously keep it free revving, but give you really the amount you want when you're doing heel and toe. So that you're not right up against the limiter with it.
Yes, because the other thing is that Gordon Murray he likes you to drive it. It's manual.
Yeah.
You know, so you've got to heel and toe. It
Yeah.
won't auto blip.
No, and that's what I mean about old school. It's not about. It's really true engineering. Really, what I grew up with, I suppose, of thinking what a sports car or supercar would be, and it's very much that, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really one special car. Of course, Gordon Murray had huge success, didn't he, with the McLaren F1. This is the same. I think it will be the same for him. I think this will go down in history. But the big feature is that fan on the back, isn't it?
Yes. Well, it's centre seat like a McLaren F1
yeah.
and the fan on the back.
Yeah, and the fan on the back, do you want to say a little bit where that comes from?
Yeah, so the Brabham fan, those of you who don't know, so back in the sort of early 80s when they had ground effects, it was all about controlling the air underneath the car. Basically, if you could suck the air out from under the car, it glued itself to the road. And the thing with moving it, you couldn't have things that move, everything had to be static. So what Gordon Murray did was he stuck this fan on the back of it and said it was for cooling the engine. And he said something like 51% of its function was for engine cooling. The other 49% sucked the air, so it was like a Hoover. It just sucked the air out from under the car and it glued it to the road.
It's a bit like ground effects, in other words.
Yeah, it was ground effects era. And the only race it did, Nicky Lauda did, and it won, and he sandbagged all through practice. And he apparently set off, and Mario Andretti was following it in a Lotus ground effects car, and he said he described it as it was painted to the road.
Yeah.
And then they withdrew it. So Bernie Ecclestone, who owned Brabham at the time, knew that it was going to cause a war. So people say it was banned after it won the race. It wasn't banned. They pulled it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then I think they banned the technology. But Brabham actually said we can't do any more races. This we only did one race and won it.
Yeah. But what's great though is he's used that heritage and put that in this car. So which when I saw it, a picture of it, I thought, well, I'm not sure about the fan, but actually seeing it for real in the flesh, it's a really cool feature, but it's not too overbearing either.
No.
So I really...
The car's so small, isn't it? And the fan's not that big on the back
yeah,
of it.
because I think in pictures it looks much bigger than it actually is. And yeah, for me, gosh, I mean, I can see why it's sold out straight away, because that's just going to increase in value.
How often do you get to buy... It's a bit like the Valkyrie, really. How often do you get to buy a car designed by Gordon Murray?
Yeah.
How often do you get to buy a car designed by Adrian Newey? And they're the two cars. And then what I like is the Valkyrie is very, very different, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it is. It's totally different to that.
Totally different.
Which is great because you get to see designers, engineers do really what they want. A bit of a free-for-all with these cars. And I just think that's what the industry's about, is these sort of cars, really.
Yes.
And that's what makes people smile, and you listen to that, and whether you're into cars or not, it would just make you smile, wouldn't it? It's just so special. And it reminds us of the good days of Formula One, really, with the noise side.
Formula One cars should sound like that.
Yeah, well, I think it should, honestly. So yeah, anyway, so we'll see. We'll try and get some footage and stuff on the channel and things with that, but we weren't allowed to do any filming at Millbrook, unfortunately, which was a shame. Because it's such a special car. But we will try and do some more coverage on that a bit later on the channel. Yeah. So if we move on to driving then,
yes,
it's the really exciting topic of motorways, which Richard decided he wanted to talk about this week.
Because the vast majority of our road driving is on motorways.
Yes, true.
We do a lot of motorway driving.
And we see a lot, and I don't mean this horribly, bad motorway driving.
We do. And we talk to a lot of people who won't go on them because they're terrified of them and all that kind of stuff. So I thought we'd just briefly go through our sort of take on motorway driving, really, because there's a lot of misconceptions with it, really. I mean, as much as anything, there's been a lot of changes in the way that motorways work, because it's something like they make up quite a small percentage of the road network, but something like 68% of all freight goes on motorways, so they're very significant parts of the road network. And the government have spent more money on motorways than any other road type. They've changed all the smart motorways. It's probably
fairly obvious.
Yeah.
When you look at the road quality on country
that's
roads.
true. Yeah. But with the technology and the signposts and the way that they all work, and the way that they're trying to manage traffic flow on motorways, and it is very clever. Yeah. Smart motorways without hard shoulders, we're not quite convinced about.
No, I have to say, I'm really against not having a hard shoulder, because there's been quite a few. I don't know how many now. but quite a few fatalities because of smart motorways. Now, I don't want to scare people or put people off going on them, but one thing I've advised anybody I know is whatever the problem is with your car, if you can keep it going, you keep it going until you get to one of those safe points. What do they call them?
Oh, they're like lay-bys, aren't they?
Yeah, they're like little lay-bys, but they do vary. Like on the M6, you have a couple close together, and then one seems to be miles away from the next one. So all I say, puncture, whatever it is, you keep going until you get to a point where you can pull over safely. Because there's been too many people killed now where they've sat waiting for the lane to shut, and it was taking, I read somewhere, averagely 45 minutes for the Highways Agency to shut the lane, averagely, from when they were notified. So of course that's a long time sat in a car. So they've had fatalities of people trying to get out, but also people sitting in their cars as well. So that's the only sort of thing which is debatable at the moment with smart motorways, but the technology is improving, isn't it?
Yes.
So I do think if we can react quicker,
yes,
then it wouldn't be a problem.
Because of everything that you've just said there, there's still less than 3% of all road traffic accidents happen on motorways.
Exactly.
They are by far the safest road type you're driving by a long. Even with that,
yeah.
Because the problem is, people go on there and think they're massively dangerous, they're hideously dangerous. They're not at all.
Yeah.
So you're much more likely to have a serious accident, kill yourself, hurt yourself, whatever, on an A road than you ever are on a motorway.
Yeah, that's very
It's just the problem with the motorway is if you stop.
Yeah.
So you've got to avoid stopping.
Keep going, basically. And we know with hard shoulders, the dangers of just sitting there. You'd have to get out and over the barrier. So, of course, a live lane is just whatever it is. It doesn't matter how much it screws the car up. You just got to keep going, haven't you?
Absolutely.
If the opportunity is there, of course, that's the thing. But yeah, so sorry, carry on with the
so the thing with it is the one type of road that you're not taught on.
Yeah.
Though you can now go on there, I think, if you're a learner, but nobody's really taught how to drive on a motorway. So things like people sitting in the wrong lane and stuff like that is because it's not because they're being belligerent. It's they don't understand that essentially you drive in drive in lane one unless you're overtaking.
Yeah.
The other lanes are purely for overtaking.
Yeah, unless it states otherwise on a gantry, which you will find certainly further south you go. Can be a bit more frequent where it will say stay in lane, but of course that's because it's so heavy and the traffic predominantly is doing the same speed in every lane that there is no point chopping and changing lanes in that situation. But that's really the only time you should really sit in a lane for any length of time, really. Obviously if you're overtaking, that's fine. You might be overtaking quite a few cars, that's fine, but once there is a decent gap to pull in, then you should pull back over ultimately, shouldn't you? Yeah,
you should. You're supposed to keep to the left. You know, I mean, if it's a quiet motorway, you're in lane 2 and there's a truck half a mile away, then there's no harm in staying where you are. There's not a lot of people trying to overtake. But what causes a lot of congestion quite often is people don't move back to the left when they should. Mm-hmm. If somebody isn't moving back to the left, it's not a lot you can do about it. That's what you're supposed to do. It's a bit like lane 3.
Yeah, don't get your horn and flash your
because
lights.
It doesn't make any difference. All you do is
call them
yourself.
certain,
exactly.
certain names, which I know. I've witnessed a few people doing that.
But essentially with motorways, I think it's just you've got to keep planning in your head. You quite often see people get themselves boxed in because I tend to find people like to run in one lane. You see that quite often.
Yeah.
So you get somebody who comes up behind you, and they'll stay there for 20 minutes till you move over, and then they'll go past. You know, because they don't want to go around. But so planning ahead and not getting yourself boxed in really is what I was trying to get people to do on motorways. I
think vision is key with that, with planning ahead. It sounds really obvious, I know, but and I go on about vision pretty much with everything. But with motorways, I think people have a tendency to really focus on the car ahead of them, and that's it, and sit far too close, so that's all they can see as well. So the key is keeping a lot of space around you and trying to look well ahead. So I don't mean even the next car, as far as you can see really. You keep scanning so you're aware behind as well. That's the other factor, because that's a constant changing situation as well. So you want regular checks in the mirrors, but also well ahead. So you're not reacting to things as they happen then. A lot of people react, they're not being proactive, they're being reactive to everything that's happening in the situation.
Because if you can see a car or a van or something, whatever it is, moving along the lane to your left and it's catching a truck, it's going to want to pull out.
Yeah,
so don't wait until he signals and starts looking around. get out of the way of them.
Absolutely. And it's not, obviously you might be in a situation where you can't, there might be something overtaken, but you're trying to preempt that situation and think, okay, right, I either need to speed up a bit so I can get through before he wants to move, or I back off and I let him out. But it's trying to read those situations. And I've had people sat with me saying, I think my nan said, how did you know he was going to pull out, and things like that. And it's just reading the situation. I'm just, because of course we've been trained to do it, I suppose, but more aware that, okay, I can see that's closing on that. The chances are they're going to want to pull out, so I'm going to give them room. And just trying to just react to any situation before it happens, ultimately. So being proactive all the time with everything. And of course, a lot of people, in fairness, aren't really thinking about driving, are they, on the motorway? I know that sounds awful, but it's true. You're going from A to B, you're going to work or whatever it is, your mind's probably on other things. You might be on, on the phone, obviously legally, through the car, and mind elsewhere. But that's why it's so important, really, to try and focus on what you're doing ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. And the way so we're saying about smart motorways, what you find now, a lot of the new signage, and the new signage is designed to keep traffic flowing. And what they do, so you'll see a sign, it might drop the speed limit to 60 and it'll say pedestrians or animals on the road. And you go further down the road and you expect to see a herd of zebra running across the road, but you never see them. And if you don't see them and you don't stop, it's worked perfectly. Because what they're trying to do, they from the psychology and the research that's done, if you tell people why you've slowed them down, they're more likely to think, oh, right, I better slow down, somebody in the road, or there's a cow running across the road. Whatever it is that makes you obey the speed limit actually works quite well. And because they've slowed the traffic 5 or 6 miles further away from the incident, rather than stopping it for the incident and then getting it going again, the whole motorway network works quite well.
Yeah.
So they're very clever, and they're trying to help us, and that's what smart motorways are about. Like we said about the hard shoulder, we're not sure about that, but a lot of the technology that's in smart motorways is very clever. And
I do believe, rather than aborting smart motorways and putting a hard shoulder back, is there should be more, certainly more rescue points, lay-bys, and clearly we need to work on the reaction times, because obviously it's designed that they can see everything on every stretch, can't they?
Yeah.
But there's also a delay somewhere with actually shutting the lane. So that's obviously the bit that needs working on. Because if that works quick enough, then hopefully you stop, the lane goes then with a big cross on it, and people move over straight away.
And you
is
should
the
do.
ideal
If you've got a cross,
situation.
you shouldn't drive any further down the road.
Yeah, because a lot of people still do that. They'll keep driving for quite a while on a lane that isn't live. Which you can't, that is illegal, you're not allowed to do that. So, so yeah, it's all things just worth bearing in mind. But yeah, obviously I know I've said about the negatives of it, but overall they are by far the safest roads you can drive on. And it's just thinking about it a bit more, because I think when you're in a straight line going for miles, it's so easy to switch off with motorways more than anything else and have silly incidents that you just don't need to have. And it's just trying to remind yourself that you might have done that route a lot, but don't ever get complacent with it. That's kind of the key thing with driving in general, is your regular routes. Don't get complacent just because you do them all the time.
Absolutely.
So we're going to go on to motorsport.
Yes.
As always, our favourite subject.
So
Turkish GP.
We have a Grand Prix.
Yeah. So we've watched quali, haven't we?
Yeah, so it's Sunday morning, so it hasn't happened yet. So
So
there's a few things to talk about before we get to that point. The first one being Alonso's experiment in Sochi.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's funny, because they went out on the way down round to the grid. Alonso shot off down the escape road at turn 1 and came back on at turn 3 or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And he was like, oh, what did he do that for? And of course, in the race, he just kept his foot in and went shot down straight down the escape road and came back on at turn 3.
I love Alonso, so you can all have a go at him, but I think he's great. So.
But then, of course, what it turns out, because he's such a bright bloke, gets to Turkey and he said, well, they did it on purpose to see what the reaction would be. Because he was saying that at several races this year, he's felt like a bit of an idiot because he's done everything he can to stay on the road, and somebody's just gone round him on the runoff and come back on in front, and he's been like, well, hang on a minute, and they've stayed where they are. So he wanted to see what the reaction would if he did it, and of course immediately the FIA jumped all over it and all that kind of stuff.
Well, they did and didn't, because actually they didn't really do, they didn't as in on the publicity side. There's been a lot of talk about it, but there was no form of him being penalised or even any question of that, because it hadn't been reported, which I didn't know. They can't do anything unless something's reported, which I didn't really know. I thought with track limits in general and things, you didn't have to report it and then they look at it. But apparently that's what who was it? Anthony Davidson was saying that that's why nothing was done about it, because nobody reported it, because he went across, back on, he gave one of the places back and ended up back in his starting position anyway. So technically he did nothing wrong.
No.
But I think his point more than anything is we've got these crazy runoff areas now. He's used to racing. He's going to be the most experienced man in F1 once Kimi goes. He's used to racing on all sorts of circuits. He's obviously been over to the States. And I think, like a lot of us, we don't get why there has to be so much tarmac.
No.
I understand they're trying to juggle the safety, but you put more tarmac there, drivers will use it. And I think that's what
absolutely.
he found frustrating, is he's trying to keep within the white lines, doing all the correct stuff, and people are taking the mick and using that opportunity of saying, oh, well, I was trying to avoid that, so I've gone this way, but seeing the gain out of that.
I mean, at Monza this year,
advantage.
Loads of people lost their laps because they were running wide coming out of the Parabolica to go down the pit straight. You know, lap after lap, deleted lap. And then they showed some footage from somewhere earlier, and right by the edge of the road was grass.
Yeah.
There was nobody ran off the road.
Yeah.
Nobody had a shunt there.
Yeah.
You think, why don't we just put a strip of grass there?
But
then?
that's the other thing, is it that safe when it encourages you to push even more?
Yes.
Because I do believe you can feel too safe in environments and take more risks because of it. And I think that is something that we're seeing a bit more in general with some of the moves now. We've seen it with Max and Lewis. I think, yeah, it's certainly something that I would like to see change. I don't think we should have runoff, but I don't think it should be tarmac. Certainly not acres and acres of tarmac. I just think that's just crazy. And I think that's where Alonso was coming from, is he wanted to make a statement. He's fairly controversial. He's going to say what he thinks. He's always been that way, which sometimes hasn't worked for him, admittedly. Yeah. But I do get his point in this situation, that you're going to get wound up by it, and why is it okay to do that? So yeah, so that's why he did it so blatantly.
Yes.
But anyway, so that was quite entertaining. So, anyway, moving on.
So that we've got Red Bull and AlphaTauri running white liveries in honour of Honda. So it should have been the Japanese Grand Prix this weekend.
Yeah, because I honestly wondered why they were honouring Honda on this specific one, but that's exactly it, isn't it? It was meant to be the Japanese Grand Prix, but because of COVID, unfortunately, they couldn't go there, so they had to cancel that, and they've put this in their place.
And I think they've pretty much said that Honda are actually going to carry on, but in the background. So hence probably why they've kept Yuki Tsunoda.
Yeah.
Done him a favour.
Yeah, well, absolutely, it has, hasn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, we'll go on to qualifying in a minute, but he's performed pretty well actually this weekend.
Right, actually,
to be fair.
Yeah.
So should we talk about turn 8 then?
Yeah. So this is the key thing with Turkey, right the way back from when they first went there, and I remember when they last went there in the sort of 2009, 10, 11, somewhere around there. There was like the crowd was something like 5,000 people. And they were interviewed, probably Fernando, and he waved at somebody in the crowd because he basically knew most of the people that stood watching. But one of the things, it's an awesome track. It's an astonishing track, and it's got turn 8 has got 4 apexes, and it's flat
that's
out.
Amazing to watch.
The drivers all love it. And you see them all come in, and they all love the track.
And they've all said that pretty much. And actually, I was watching with Rich an onboarder Lewis's lap.
Yes.
And one thing that stood out, and I've done a little thing on my Facebook with it, I'll share it on other social media things, but his smoothness and finesse through that apex, so 4 apexes, and he barely changes the adjustment on the wheel movement.
Well, it's like, a pole lap as well, it's a qualifying lap,
so
it's on the limit.
Right on the limit, and he's barely moving his hands through those 4 apexes, so he sets it up at the first one, and it goes in, out, in, out, in, out. And it's amazing. I mean, there is subtle adjustments, but we're talking very minute adjustments, really. Yeah. And it just highlighted, like we say, so much to people about smoothness and finesse. That gets you to the true limit of grip. And that's really what he was doing there, wasn't it? Yeah. And even with the tighter corners, what was fascinating is he was doing like a very soft, gentle input initially, and then speeding up his hands and steering quite quickly after. But it was never, ever aggressive initially. So it's never shocking the car and losing the grip. He sort of like gently introduces it, then speeds it up. And I just thought, the technique involved when you know what you're looking at to a point is fascinating, what he could do.
And the other thing they've started to do a bit more with data.
Yeah, which has been brilliant.
So a couple of, again, with Leclerc over Norris and Hamilton over Verstappen, how they were using less brake pressure. Yeah. So not just standing on the brakes, like slightly longer, lighter braking, which is something I was taught when I first started racing, one particular guy I've talked about before, a guy called Malcolm Barfoot, used to say that quite a lot. A longer, lighter brake will gain you a much more accurate entry speed, and you'll gain more from doing that. And that's basically what they're doing, is a longer, lighter brake.
Yeah, so
by degrees, still like 4G rather than 4.5.
You will see this if you watch it. I mean, it depends where you're watching it from, but with the Sky F1, they've been really good with that recently. So they actually were showing a data trace through turn 9 of Max and Hamilton. And you could see the difference. So Hamilton was actually on the brakes for longer than Max, but he wasn't braking as hard. So it was interesting seeing the difference then through the corner and the outcome of who was getting on the power quicker afterwards. So they've done a really good job actually, Sky, with that. And I say Sky, I might be the same on Channel 4 and things, I don't know.
Well, it's Amazon technology, it's AWS, isn't it? Yeah,
it's been really, really good, because also in free practice, it's become, I think, more engaging, because they're now giving you a lot more sector times and the mini sectors as well. So they're able to put together laps of what and predict what fuel they're running, all that kind of stuff. So you get a lot more information. So somebody like Science was quite far down in free practice, but it turned out he was doing lots of long, heavy fuel runs, basically, because he's going to start at the back. So they were practicing something completely different with him than Leclerc. But it makes it a lot more interesting when you know what you're looking at and getting to see data, different sectors, and I think it will teach people an awful lot if you're into your cars and driving, just by watching that kind of stuff, honestly. Really, really good. So Science has got a new power unit, so that's why it's got to start at the back, obviously.
Yeah, whole new power unit.
Yeah, Leclerc's done really well. So I think we should talk a little bit about qualifying, really.
Yes, so Lewis is quick. He's been dominant all weekend, to be honest.
Yeah.
And I think what they did on Friday...
Probably the most dominant.
Yeah, he was a lot quicker than anybody on Friday, and I think that's when Mercedes thought, well, we'll change the engine.
Yeah.
We'll set the car up to come through the field.
Yeah.
So he was quickest in qualifying, but he starts 11th, doesn't he?
Yeah, so technically he's not on pole, so he's not the pole sitter.
No.
So he is the fastest man, but not
pole setter, but not pole sitter.
Yeah, absolutely. So Bottas will gain the pole. I mean, Bottas had closed to get to him quite a bit, actually.
He's so much more chilled now, isn't he?
Yeah, Bottas seems so much happier now. I honestly think he needed to get out of that seat and start again. And I think it just mentally has messed with his head so much, and he's performing better, he looks happier, so that's great to see, and we'll see off the back of that what he does today.
He's on the front row with Max, isn't he? So Max is on the front row.
And Leclerc managed to pull a lap out the bag quite late, and they were really struggling in Q1 and 2.
Yeah, he's running a very low downforce setup.
Absolutely, he's running trying to basically have it ready for the race, is what he was saying. So it's got a very low downforce. But of course, and it was slippery conditions, so it was wet and dry in places. So he didn't really have much downforce, where normally you'd have more downforce in those conditions. But he's such a good driver that he was able to work it out. So he worked it out. So by Q3, late on, but he worked it out and got up there, didn't he? So he'll be technically third.
Yes.
But he obviously qualified 4th officially, didn't he?
Yeah.
Before the penalties came in. And then we got Gasly. I mean, one thing with Gasly, I don't know what he has to do to get a top drive again, because he's just been so consistent. For me, at the moment, he's a standout for me as a driver. And it's proved the point time and time again that something's wrong at Red Bull in the main team. I think the car has been completely designed around Max, and I think Max might have a slightly unusual driving style that it doesn't fit with a lot of drivers, because Perez is finding it just as difficult. They were talking that Perez finds it very hard on the corners where you have to really carry the brake in. So he's really struggling with that confidence. And the same with Ricciardo, actually. They were saying the same about him, transferring to McLaren. He's great at being a late breaker like he always has, but he's struggling to get that feel and balance with the quicker stuff, but carrying the brake in, because he's finding it too nervous. And Perez was saying a very similar thing. And I think because a car for Red Bull has been designed so much around Max, that other drivers are getting into it and just finding it too nervous to drive, because it just doesn't suit their driving style. Because there aren't many drivers that have it like that. Alonso has it like that, doesn't he? Where it's very nose sharp and very oversteery at the back, but there aren't many drivers. So that's been an interesting kind of thing, certainly. But for Gasly, I just think he deserves another shot. He was so young at the time. I don't think he probably wants to go to the main seat at Red Bull, but he needs a shot in a top team, I think.
Yeah.
But we'll have to wait and see what happens
So we'll
there.
see.
And then Alonso, of course.
And then
Alonso. So what's that make him? 5th in the race start. So he was phenomenal watching him all through free practice, qualifying. As I said, he has a very sharp nose, very oversteery car, but he's just so ahead of the car all the time. You can see he's reacting to things before they've happened. He's so in tune with it. And the Alpine's not quick. I mean, you can see with Ocon, as Alonso's got his eye in more and more and more, Ocon's struggling to handle Alonso, isn't he?
He is, yeah. And that's going to be the thing, and that's probably in the race. We don't know if it's going to be wet, is the first thing.
Yeah.
Because obviously the thing is that Hamilton has got the quickest car, and he thinks he can win the race, which I'm sure he probably can. Is if it's wet, it's going to be much harder for him to come through the field because he won't be able to see.
Yeah, that's true.
But for me, the problem he's going to have, he's probably going to get up to probably 6th fairly quickly.
Yeah.
But then he's going to be stuck behind Perez, then Alonso.
Yeah.
You know,
and then
Leclerc isn't going to let. Yeah. So he's going to hit wall. But there is quite a long straight at Turkey. So.
Yeah, but Toto was saying that when they were trying to get the car set up for the race, that they were struggling even with a Haas and with a Williams. They were getting stuck behind and not getting through. But then that said, I don't know if he's just playing it safe and playing it down by saying all of that. Because like you say, there is a long straight, and with DRS, it doesn't matter really then about, you know, aero and following and things, because they've suddenly got so much more power. They just breeze past, don't they? So, you know, I think that's going to be the battle for all the drivers with Lewis, is that long straight.
Yes.
How do you keep him behind in that situation?
So it'd be interesting to see. So
unless you've got DRS as well. Yeah, so, I mean, do we know if it's going to be wet today or not?
No.
Okay, so we'll find that out.
We'll find that out. And we'll report back next week as to what happens.
Yeah. So, interactive question. I thought of something that I will ask myself, I suppose. If you had to pick a driver coach to be your driver coach, who would it be and why? So, what would you say?
That's
Rich?
a very good question, because my default setting would be Rob Wilson.
Okay.
Just because I think, you know.
You might need to explain about
So Rob Wilson is basically the F1 driver coach, and he's an aging hippie. He was a very good racing driver, but he's an aging hippie, and he plays in a band and all that kind of stuff. And
but he's worked at times with like over 80% of F1 field and stuff.
And I love his philosophy on driving, and you listen to him talk, and it's all about the subtleties of it and introducing things to the car and talk to it, don't shout at it and all that. And I just love the way things. So I'd love to go and spend a couple of days with Rob Wilson, to be honest.
Yeah, so that would be your.
That'd be me.
I don't. Yeah. So I
asked
this,
the question,
and I don't really know, because I always say the same people. But I honestly think, for me, it probably would be Alonso, because I took out for a couple of years ago now Martin Whitmarsh and a couple of other people over the years, and everybody says the same. Who would you say has been the best driver? I mean, talent-wise, so forget what they've actually achieved, but talent-wise, who's been the best driver in your era? And everybody, when I ask that, says Alonso. And I would love to actually sit and get some coaching off Alonso to really see
his
why.
Philosophy on it,
Yeah, because you think, well, okay, why is that though? Why? And you can tell even with the commentary and stuff, everybody's a little bit in awe of Alonso with his ability. You can even just tell when listening to Jenson Button and Anthony Davidson, and you know, they're like, well, if one man can cope with it, it's definitely Alonso. And he just has this air of everybody just knows he's the best all-rounder. But why? And that's what I would love to. I mean, I would love to sit find out, to be honest.
Yes, and I mean, I'd love to sit with Lewis and talk about driving.
Yeah.
Just to get how he goes about his craft and what you know, what he tries to get the car to do, and you know, I'd love to do that with him.
Yeah, because he'll work so much harder at it than people will give him credit for.
Yeah.
Because it's so easy to, you know, look at things on social media and judge, but honestly, you can't be that good and at that level and not work bloody hard at it.
And what fascinates me is how different they are. So growing up, my hero was Nigel Mansell, and Mansell always liked a little tiny steering wheel because he liked to muscle the car. And I've heard him talk about his big thing was he always wanted it up on its tiptoes.
Yeah.
So it was like a rally car almost, like it would dart around. And but of course, you've got to have massive ability to do that, to cope with. This is what they say about Lewis. Lewis doesn't mind what the car does on the way in.
Yeah.
Because his ability to feel what it's doing and react to it before it's happened is so much extraordinary.
Yeah.
He makes it walk on water, and the greats do.
Yeah.
So I'd love to just sit and talk to him about how much it just gets it up on its tiptoes. But you don't see it because he's so good. You don't see it.
And that's the thing. It's so smooth. So when people think tiptoes, they probably picture somebody sort of soaring at the wheel. But actually, with modern cars especially, that's really not the case because they've got a lot of aero and things. So you're feelings a little bit different, aren't they, to older cars where the rubber's quite small, it's hard, so the car's constantly four-wheel drifting. They're not really like that now, are they? But you can still get a car up on its tiptoes and dancing around, but like Rich says, almost before it actually happens, before it actually properly dances, isn't it?
There's a great story of we've talked a little bit about Ronnie Peterson in the past, and Ronnie Peterson was one of the great natural ability drivers, but he was terrible at setting cars up because he'd just drive around everything. And Lotus he was driving Lotus, and they came in and the rear tyres were on fire, and the first thing he said was, "It's understeering," and they were like, "Ronnie, your back tyres are on fire," and he says, "Yeah, well, otherwise it'll understeer."
Oh yeah, so he's driven around the problem.
Yeah.
But that's what's so impressive, isn't it? With some of the greats, like you say, they can get into anything and work it out. And we saw this with Leclerc yesterday. He really had to work that car out, didn't he? For those conditions, because it was not set up for that.
And for me, he's the one who's most like Alonso, because in the race, Alonso's dangerous for everybody else because of how relentless he is in races.
Yeah,
he's always there. And that's what Leclerc's a bit like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll obviously talk about the Formula 1 results in the next episode as well. And we've got a few things to talk about next week because there's loads going on this weekend.
A lot of gossipy stories and things like that.
World Challenge, BTCC. Yeah, loads of stuff going on behind the scenes with Andretti buying Alfa Romeo and, so kind of more behind the scenes in the industry stuff, and of course we're going to talk more about road cars as well. So so I think that'll be it for this week. We've mentioned obviously people coming on the podcast, which they are. We're just purposely saving them for more the winter, just because obviously at some point the motorsport starts to die down, so we're going to do...
Because we've been trying to get Jack Harvey on, haven't we? And Jack's moving IndyCar teams, and we're just waiting for all that to be settled. And
so he can then announce properly and things. So we've got quite a few coming on, but you'll notice it will suddenly happen a lot over the winter, just because we were trying to make sure there's plenty of content for, of course, when the motorsport bit dies down over the winter. So we'll obviously announce those as we go. All right, we'll catch you later.
See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.